we discussed essentially introducing or building a multi-tenant data warehouse. And the basic idea was to add a multi-tenant ID into every entity, for example. Now, this is a recommendation, so that's how we would build this. But now imagine that you build something else, right? So you start working on a data vault, or maybe, and you realize, well, the consultant comes in and says, well, you forgot something, and here's what you should have done. Now you need to change your data vault model. Or your requirements change. Maybe initially you started working on a data vault for a single source system or a couple of source systems for a single tenant, more important. So there was never a requirement to build a multi-tenant solution, or also your requirements might change in regard of privacy, for example, security, and so on, right? So there might be some requirement down the road in your project where you need to change your solution, to refactor your solution. Now, I got schooled one day by a refactoring or redesign specialist, so I was looking this up again, the difference between refactoring and redesigning. Now, I call this, what we're doing here, refactoring, because refactoring is all really about the internal structure, changing the internal structure of your solution, and essentially adding additional or modifying it slightly, right, on a constant basis. Where a redesign is a bigger change, where you change something that the end user can see. Now, first of all, the raw data vault is typically an internal structure. The casual user will not see those raw data structures. Yes, the power users, but they are the guys who also come to your house and re-engineer something, right? So they also revamp some of your house essentially. Because it's a small scale change here and there, because it's a more internal change that the users don't see, I stick to the term refactoring, which I have used all the time. For a while, I tried to change it to redesign, but then I looked it up again and AI must be right? So that's the idea. So I stick to the term refactoring because it's a constant change. Same's true for example, for Scale-Free. Initially, with the very first data warehouse team that we had internally, as many other teams, they tried they spent a lot of time trying to find a very good model, right? Now, what I told them is, don't even try, don't even bother, because I don't really care about how good the model is initially, right? What I care about is make some decisions, get it into production, and see how your decisions, what impact your decisions have on the final product. How fast accuracy will be, how easy can the raw data be used to attach business logic, derive information out, and so on. So focus on deploying something rather than having the best model. And then when you realize that the solution is not good enough, that you don't meet certain requirements, let's say for performance, query performance, for example, or loading performance, or complexity, or what else, when you don't meet those requirements, then focus on a constant refactoring. So you deploy something first, initially, that's your initial release, and then you refactor it over a series of sprints until it reaches the requirements, essentially. But here's the other thing. We will prioritize this. And just like with most other clients, even at Scale-Free, we focus on our users. They honestly, performance, would be nice if it's faster, but if they have to make a decision between adding a new report or some new KPIs to an existing report and making the existing reports faster, they go for a new report, very commonly, right? So only if the report is really bad performance-wise, then they might say, well, we can't use this yet, you have to improve performance, right? So that's the thing. So the reason, or the amount of refactoring is not that big, even though we optimized our development processes for that. So get something out of the door and then improve your capabilities to refactor your solution on a constant basis. That's what I would do essentially. Instead of going for a big bang and discussing for months what the right business key is here and there, that's a waste of time. Because while you're discussing this for months, and I had this in my very first data project, we were discussing the right business key for customers for 4 months and haven't deployed anything. If you deploy it after, let's say, 2 or 4 weeks of your first sprint, if you deploy your first solution, realize it's not the optimal solution, refactor it, that's another sprint, and you're done, right? And so I'm looking at 2 sprints versus 4 months, however that relates, right? And then the other thing is, you can discuss this for months, and you don't know if you have a good solution, a decent solution, if you don't deploy it into production. And only then you know what's going on. And the other thing is, it's a learning path, right? So from the mistakes we make in deployment or in putting our features into production, we learn and improve essentially, right? So in reality, we don't refactor that much because we have a decent understanding of how data vault works and we deploy it relatively good in the first place. At least it's good enough for the business users to say, well, you know what? Fast enough. Let's focus on new features. That's what's happening all the time, essentially, right? So, but here's the approach. So first of all, I decided to keep calling it refactoring because we're changing the structures of the raw data vault and maybe the business vault, maybe the information marts, but a lot of that stuff is internal structure. If you look at a data platform, the business user, they will look at the facade, at the report and dashboard, right? So the data model is more internal structure. You can argue what's internal. Is the dimension model really internal because it's more end user facing? We can argue on that, but that's what it is. So I keep calling it refactoring. And the question now is that, and it's again a extension to the previous previous question from 2 weeks ago. So let me just read this. So recruiter entity, so like the client is a company in the recruiting business essentially, is now a focus for this release. Each requisition is led by only one recruiter. My existing source tables had recruiter ID, but now I need to hub it out and provide recruiter information from additional source tables for hub recruiter. How should I progress change with my physical data vault objects to meet release 2 requirements? Close the link and satellites and build new link, extended with recruiter hub key, generate link between requisition and recruiter only. That would require splitting link. What if historical backfill is required? Is the approach the same with 60 tenants in data warehouse? What if one client stores recruiters assigned to requisition in separate physical table? So I have table A, requisition ID, candidate ID, and client ID, and table B, requisition ID and recruiter ID. What's your tip for putting it all together in business vault information map? Now here's the thing. For the raw data vault, what I would do is this. We discussed, I believe, last time that you can have a satellite capturing data from multiple sources. That's actually against the basic rule. The basic rule says a satellite is only loaded from one source system. Well, with the big exception, if the structure of your multiple source systems is the same, so you're looking at the same source system essentially, and if you have a identifier in your parent link or hub that partitions your data. If you add the tenant ID to your hub and link, that tenant ID will make sure that a delta from tenant A will not replace a delta from tenant B because the hash keys will be different, right? So once you have that in place, this tenant ID in the parent and the same structure, we can load into the same satellite. And the same is true for hubs and links. Hubs and links are typically loaded from multiple source systems. But here comes the catch. Let's say, first of all, let's start with the question at the bottom. What if you have different structures? Well, you're violating the structural issue. So I would never load this into the same satellite. And even for links and hubs, I might tend, especially for links, for example, I would tend to create different links. If you have one relationship in system A or a couple of systems for different tenants, that defines a relationship between 3 business keys from the source table, that's a link with 3 hub references. When you have a couple of other tenants where they only have 2 business keys inside the source tables, that's a different link essentially, right? So those are different links because there's different granularities involved. You could separate or split this link with 3 hub references into multiple links as well. I would avoid that because of the potential violation of the unit of work. So I'm not a big fan of splitting links in the raw data vault. I would actually keep them as they are in the source. In FlowBI, for example, we define what we call a unit of work link, which I always have to explain in a training what this is essentially when we look at the general model. The unit of work link is essentially a link that spans across all the hub references coming from the same source table. We never split a link in FlowBI. Well, we do, but only in addition. We always keep this unit of work link to make sure we have the data captured in a consistent way. And then there might be additional links for hierarchies and so on, but those are additionally. This unit of work link captures the unit of work of your data, and that spans across all the hub references from your source table. So which means that I would stick to the source systems in a raw data vault. If data comes in from one table with 3 business keys, that's a link with 3 hub references. If tables come from another, or data comes from another source table with 2 different business keys, that's another relationship. So we have a different link. It also avoids overloading links, right? What you don't want to do is to have a link that's sometimes loaded with 3 business keys, 3 hub references, and from other source systems comes with only 2 hub references, and you keep one now. That sounds like overloading. I'm not sure because I don't know your data, right? But that sounds like overloading, and you want to avoid that as well. All right, so that's the first part. So if you have different separate physical tables, that's the easy answer here. So just load everything into different structures, because the raw data vault is modeling the raw data as it's being used by the business. So we're modeling the raw data, right? All right, that's number one. And then for the refactoring, so let's say your structures change, and I believe in the existing source tables, but I believe you ignored it. That's why you want to use this habit out concept. And habit out is a typical refactoring strategy. You have some business key in the satellite, because you maybe you even know, yes, it's a business key, but I don't care because nobody's asking for it. We have no descriptive data, so what should attach to the hub, right? So we just keep the business key in the satellite and use it as a descriptive attribute. We can't explain it anyway. There was no initial release in the initial sprints. There was no definition or no descriptive data for the recruiters. If you create a hub, you have to link the hub, right? So why? Just add the business key that you cannot describe into a satellite and keep it for later. So you can use it in your reports and so on. And if you get another source system in one of the next sprints, you get another source system where they have descriptive data for your recruiter IDs. Well, in this case, we use the habit out strategy. The idea is you create a hub recruiter in this case. You select all the existing business keys from your historical loads. They are in the satellite. So you just do a select distinct on the recruiter ID column in the satellite. You hash the values and then load that into the hub. You can use the load date and record source from the satellite of the first occurrence to identify the load date and record source where the business key came originally from. We have everything in the raw data vault, right? And then you would also create a link between the satellite's parent and the new hub. That link we can initial load from the relationship between the hub, the original hub, the first hub, and the satellite. That relationship indicates the relationship for the link, and we can load the effectivity satellite on that link based on the deltas in the satellite. So we can essentially perform this habit out strategy from the existing data in the raw data vault without having to reload the data from the source systems, which you might not have anymore. Well, sure, if you have a data lake, a PSA with all data that's in the satellite, you could also initial load the entities, the new entities, from the data in the data lake. I just give you options here, right? So go for either one. The second option, loading from the data lake, is your standard option that you typically generate. The first option, initial loading the new hub and link and effectivity satellite from the existing data vault, means you need to build some other, typically manually built loading procedures, essentially, right? Now, so that's one thing. So that's a habit out strategy. Now let's say, and you can also, in the same or similar way, you can generate new entities in all kinds of regards. Initial load them from the data lake or initial load them from the existing raw data vault. That works as long as your raw data vault is valid. And that's what I also essentially emphasized here at Scale3. I made sure if you deploy something into production, I don't care if you prove to me that this is the best model. We don't know anyway, right? What's the best model here? Is anybody here living in the best house? I don't know. I have a nice house, but is it the best one? I don't know. Seriously, I just don't know. There might be better houses out there, right? So, and there are. That's what I know for sure. So and even if you think you're in the best house, do you know every house in the city or in the world, right? No. So there must be maybe something better. We just don't know it, right? So getting the best model is a challenge. And I said, the only thing you have to prove to me if you deploy something into production is that your model is actually valid. Because if it's valid, we can always refactor the solution, improve it essentially, without having to reload the data from the source systems. Back then we had source systems and not always a data lake. We had a lot of transient staging areas. So on a relation database. So we can load the new entities from the existing raw data vault as long as the existing raw data vault is a valid design, where we don't have any data loss, essentially, where the data is captured in a consistent fashion. That's the only requirement. Then we can improve it over time, step by step, over a series of sprints, and that gets us closer to the best solution without knowing that which the best solution is, essentially, right? So we can prove it's becoming a better solution sprint by sprint, essentially. All right. So this habit out strategy is a standard refactoring strategy. There's some more, but it's actually a good example, essentially. And in the same way, we can derive a link. Let's say you have a link with 3 hub references, and now realize, well, we need a link with 2 hub references only, doing a set link split. We can do that. Just load with a group by statement or this thing from the existing link, right? So there's some options. We'll also take care of the FAQ satellite attached to it and so on. But and the satellites, the data satellites attached to the link, there might be some more complexities. It's not just a link, but we can produce that. All right. So yeah, that answers also the question with the historical backfill. You have 2 options, either loading from a data lake or loading from the validated raw data vault from the existing one. And then for the process, and yeah, the process is the same for 60 tenants. I believe, without knowing your data, that after the first couple of tenants, with the second tenant, you typically have to have a tenant ID inside your entities, right? Into the hubs and satellites. And with that, yeah, every tenant adds some more additional satellites across the model, but you might also reuse existing satellites, let's say for SAPs and Salesforces, where you have common structures. And so, yeah, and so every tenant you add will add more entities, but not change the whole model completely. That will the second tenant will do, right? But once the second tenant is done, it should stabilize more and more. All right. I had one more comment. Right. What's the process? Because if I would be on a business user side or power user side using your raw data vault for queries, I'm getting a little bit, I have no good word for this. I don't like this, right? Because I built a query yesterday, spent some time on this, and the query worked, gave me some results that I expected. And now with your next deployment, when you change your model, my queries break, right? Because you modified the hubs and the granularities and what else. So what about this? What about if you intend to replace an existing data vault entity with a new data vault entity? You have a couple of options here. You could, for a while at least, load both entities. Just keep both entities, the old one and the new one. Maybe the old one, yes, is limited only to 1 tenant, but so be it. My query is only expecting 1 tenant from this entity, right? Because I didn't know better in the first release. And if I want to switch now to 2 tenants or all your tenants, I have to rewrite my entity, my query against the new entity where I get multiple tenants from, and I have to deal with that and so on. But that requires some rewrite. So you could just keep loading both entities, because in Data Vault it doesn't really matter, technically speaking, it doesn't really matter if you have the same data in multiple target entities. It's some redundancy. So be it, right? Yes, it's inefficient. Yes, you require more storage, but I'm only looking at a solution for a while. Because let's say you're adding those new entities and mark the old entities as deprecated inside your metadata. Just make a deprecated flag and just mark them as deprecated. Typically on the entity level, but also on the column level. We might want to deprecate some elements. You mark them as deprecated in the metadata. Maybe you add this to the comments as well. Deprecated. This is the first name. I don't know. And then inform the power users that they're using some entities or columns that are deprecated, and they should change their queries until, and then you put up a timeline, right? So maybe you have another 90 days or a year until we're going to drop these old entities. That's your time frame. Send out an email where you inform the users which entities have been deprecated, and they can come back to you and we help you and refactor your queries. Well, we all know what that means. In a year from now, let's say that's your deadline, you have users coming back and complaining, why did you remove entities all of a sudden? Because they're not reading your emails, right? But that's what it is. So keep those entities for a while and inform your users, deprecate them, and then help them to refactor their queries. There's one more strategy what you could do. Instead of keeping those entities, because the old entities, because they also consume the storage, the thing is this: from a valid raw data vault, you can always derive any target model. And typically in the training, we talk about dimension models, star schemas, snowflake schemas, 3NF models, and so on. And now we learned also, we can derive from a valid raw data vault, we can derive a better raw data vault model. That's a refactoring process. But what about this? We could also derive the old raw data vault model from the new raw data vault model. It's just another target, right? And as long as the new model is valid, for sure, then we can also derive the old model. So why don't you just do this? Drop the old tables and recreate them as virtual views on top of the on a new raw data vault. You reconstruct the old structures, but virtually. Yes, there will be some performance impact, but I mean, inform the users, mark these entities, these views as deprecated, and that they will be removed in 90 days, a year, whatever. Inform the users that it's not only that they have to change their queries because you're going to remove these entities, also the performance have been decreased a bit already, right? So you might want to inform them. And yeah, so that's the strategy we typically use. We drop the old tables, recreate them virtually, and inform the users, and drop the view after a year or whatever, right? So that's the definition with the business users, with the power users. So, and those are the refactoring strategies here that are involved. That's regarding the process, right? Yeah, that's the idea. I hope I answered here most, if not all, of the questions. Progress change. Just double check, close the link. Yeah, so I don't close the link. I keep it loading at least for a while, but I will remove the link, the old link, once the deadline passed, right? So once the 90 days, 180 days, whatever you define with the business is over, then we remove and drop these tables because we don't want to maintain them, right? Every entity in the raw data vault, every entity you add, you have to maintain. And I mean, think about this: the data catalog becomes bigger. You have to document this. You have to refactor it, and so on. Think about the migration project in a couple of years when you have to migrate everything to the next platform. So try to keep these entities at the minimum. Remove those which are not required anymore on a constant basis as well, right? And that's why I would remove them essentially. If you have a question like this, I have one more question from this series essentially, but I'm running low. So send questions in using this link here, sfr.ee/dbfriday. That's where you can submit questions essentially. So November 26th in Hanover, there is our Data Dreamland conference where we essentially present success stories from clients, new tool features essentially from our partners, from the vendors, but also stories from internally and so on. So yeah, get your tickets. So there's a QR code here on a page. Enjoy your weekend. Thank you guys.